Good afternoon. This workshop is doing business with the City of Chicago. Is that what everybody's here for? Okay. I'm Victoria Wright, and I'm the Marketing Outreach Coordinator for Department of Procurement Services. Everyone should have signed in, as most people, some people are still here from the last workshop. But we had everybody sign in and take the handouts. The two added workshops for doing business with the city, I just added the bid opportunity list and the buying plan. So we do definitely recommend it if you're not signed up for DPS alerts that you do that, because we send out the bid opportunity list every Monday in an email, and any other pertinent procurement information goes out in a DPS alert. So basically you just go to our website, you put your email address in, and we send out the emails to you. We try not to bombard people with emails, so you might get one on Wednesday or Friday. We try to make sure we spread everything out and not send out too many emails. I do need to let you know that this workshop is being live streamed to YouTube. All DPS workshops are now on YouTube. Basically, the camera is only up here. It's not on the audience. So, yeah. Can you sign in, please? So, for that reason, we try to start on time and end on time. So, if you still have questions at the end, and we've gotten already to the end of the workshop, we will stay in the room afterwards to answer your questions. You can find the PowerPoints for all of our workshops on the City of Chicago website. So if you go to www.cityofchicago.org/DPS, you go up under events, and it'll have workshop PowerPoints. So anything that's shown today, you can get a copy of it off our website. I am going to ask that you hold all your questions to the end, and that's for people who are watching from home, so that we can bring the microphone up to you and everybody can hear your question, and then Terry will answer the question. So I am going to let these last two people get in, and we're going to get started. Terry Glavin is an attorney in Department of Procurement Services, and he is going to host this workshop. One thing, and since we're waiting, I'll let you all know, Department of Procurement Services does have an event coming up May 25th. It's our vendor fair at UIC Forum, May 25th from 9 to 1. And that's where we will have all city departments, all of our sister agencies, government agencies, assist agencies, all talking about contract opportunities. So everybody all in one place to give you contracting information. This year we're going to add banks who possibly have loans or grants that are available to small businesses. We're going to have the trade unions all in one place, because we usually get a lot of questions about how do I get into these different construction trade unions. So we'll have the trade unions there to answer those type of questions. And so I do invite all of you to come out to that. The other thing, the flyer that's out there, is the mayor is now hosting Chicago resident fairs. And those are service fairs in your community, so that you can find out what all the city departments do. So what services we provide, all the different departments will be there to tell you what is available to you for free or a charge through all the city departments. Okay, and that flyer was on the table as well. So I'm going to turn it over now to Terry Glavin.
Thank you, Victoria. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Terry Glavin. I'm counsel for the Department of Procurement Services. I want to welcome you on behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, as well as Commissioner Jamie Reed, the Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Chicago, to this afternoon's presentation on doing business with the City of Chicago. I'm going to do my best to make it as informative as possible during the next hour, and then at the end we'll reserve some time for questions. So please save your questions, but note them, and I'll do my best to answer your questions at the end of the session. So we're going to cover a number of topics today, and they are listed up on the monitor. We're going to cover the mission statement of the Department of Procurement Services. We're going to cover a little bit about the laws that govern the procurement process, types of procurement that we're involved in, certification issues, contract monitoring and compliance, programs and bid incentives, navigating the DPS website, and then again, we're going to get to questions and answers at the end. These are the general topics. On some of the topics, I'm going to get into greater detail. On other topics, I will cover less detail, and there's a reason for that. If you look outside the workshop, or if you look on the Department of Procurement Services webpage, we have a workshop schedule, and there are a number of other workshops. I present some of those workshops myself. Other members of the Department of Procurement Services present workshops as well. And some of these topics are covered in their entirety by those other workshops, and so we get in a lot greater detail on those days. But what I want to do today is, at a higher level view, give you some information about each and every topic. And what I hope to do then is, if there's something that it is apparent may apply to you, then you can go to that next workshop and get into more depth or more detail. And for others, you might hear generally about the topic and realize that's not really appropriate for me, and you won't need to go to those workshops. You won't use up your time listening to information that may not be relevant to you. So that's pretty much how I want to organize the workshop today for you, and hopefully it works in your favor. We are the Department of Procurement Services. We are the contracting authority for the city of Chicago, and our job is to make sure there are contracts in place so that departments throughout the city can buy goods and services from vendors. And that's why you're here today, to learn about how you can get into that business relationship with the city. I emphasize that we are the procurement authority for the city of Chicago because there are opportunities that are out there in the Chicagoland area that may seem like they're under our procurement authority, but they are actually under the procurement authority of sister agencies. For example, operation and maintenance of trains. That's the Chicago Transit Authority. Certain park and recreational activities might be the Chicago Park District. Those would be under sister agencies that have their own procurement authority, and for that reason, we would not be soliciting or offering those opportunities. You have to go to those agencies to look at those opportunities. Why do I mention that today? Because during the course of this workshop, I not only want to talk to you about doing business with the city, but I want to give you practical tips along the way for doing business in public procurement, specifically the city. But along the way, as I said, I'll give you as many tips as I can that might be helpful to you, even beyond our process. So that's, I think, one helpful tip. If you want to look at who the sister agencies are, or what are the sister agencies, go to cityofchicago.org/procurement. If you go to the menu at the top of the web page, the home page, there is a government tab with departments, and if you drop down that tab, there's a link that says sister agencies, and you can click on there and you can see sister agencies. And then there are links to their websites, so that might be helpful to you. When we conduct our procurement process here at the City of Chicago, we follow the law. And the structure of what we do is pretty much created by the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act, which is state law, the Chicago Municipal Code, which is 2-92. That's the section of the municipal code that enables us, it gives us our powers. We also have our policies and procedures. So if you go to cityofchicago.org/procurement, that's our webpage, and you look down our webpage, there are links to our rules, policies, and procedures. So within this framework of state law, and then this tighter framework of local municipal law, we also have our policies and procedures that sort of create our operations and how we do things. And it's important for you as vendors to know those laws and details, because as you're going to learn during this discussion, public procurement is more or less award of contracts by competition. And if you're going to compete for contracts, it's very helpful for you to understand the rules so that you can compete against other vendors as well. And we're going to do our best to talk about those rules. And I encourage you to do your own research as well. First of all, at our webpage, there are a number of great resources, and we're constantly adding resources. I encourage you to wander around our procurement department webpage and look at the resources and learn I know you're busy with your own business schedule, but I encourage you to spend some time learning about our local process. Also, you can go to websites. There's a publisher, for example, amlegal.com, amlegal.com, and that is an authorized publisher of the Chicago Municipal Code. It has a map of the United States. You can click through to Chicago and ultimately click through and pull up the Chicago Municipal Code, click on 2-92, and you'll be able to see the section of the Municipal Code that applies to us. Lastly, if there are federal funds involved, if we're using some federal dollars as part of paying for a project, this is common in road construction, transportation, some health and human services operations, then we follow certain federal laws. With all that said, I don't mean to tell you that you have to go out today and read every federal law that's out there and every state law that's out there, but I want you to be aware of the law because we live by it. That's what ensures that we have a system with integrity and that everyone has a fair chance at contracting opportunities. But by the same token, the way we live by those rules, vendors have to live by those rules as well. So I encourage you to start getting familiar with the rules. What about the types of procurement? These are lists of the way that we procure goods and services, but that hints at the fundamental set of categories. We buy goods and we buy services. So start with that. If you're not familiar with the procurement process, start thinking in terms of goods and services, right? And then once we decide what it is we're interested in buying, we have to figure out a process to get that opportunity out there and receive either proposals or bids from vendors for the projects. So we choose a process based on what it is we're trying to buy. So if we're trying to buy goods like commodities, sometimes services, and we know that the purchase is going to be under $100,000 total, then the law allows us to follow what's called a small order process. It's a little bit more of an informal process. If we are buying commodities, goods like pens, pencils, police cars, anything other than services, we use a competitive bid process where we pretty much award to the lowest responsible bidder. And I'll explain what all that means. If we are looking for work services, now we're getting into services, right? If we're looking for work services, then we also use competitive bid. You might be asking, what's work services? Work services are one type of service, and the other type is professional service. Work services are a little more common in nature, and that's why we put them out through competitive bid. Professional services are ones that by law are recognized as being a little more highly skilled, and skill is a little bit more of a part of the evaluation process, so we award it by a somewhat more a process that allows more for consideration of the skill set, not just price. So we look at both the price, but we also look at the skill set. Why? Let's take healthcare, for example. When we look for a doctor for ourselves, do you really just want to find out who's the lowest cost healthcare provider out there? No. For healthcare, you want to, you have a budget, so you know you have a limit on how much you want to spend, but you know you want to get the best doctor at the best price. So you don't just go to the lowest price doctor. That's similar to what we do here at the city. There are some projects that we can't just go to the lowest bidder because there's a certain amount of quality that we need to get. And we try to get the best quality balancing our budget in the process. And so that's how RFPs work. RFQs are similar. That's when we're looking for services that are of a professional nature. And RFQs are where we're going to create a pool of professional service providers. So going back to the list, RFPs, we're going to award typically one contract to a professional service provider. RFQs are when we're going to try to put together a pool of professional service providers and go to that pool every time specific projects come up over the course of maybe several years. And then lastly is job order contracting. If you're interested in construction, job order contracting is a process where small to medium-sized construction projects are put out for bid. There's a separate workshop on JOC, or job order contracting, so I'll encourage you to attend that shop. If you're in construction. I'll touch upon it a little bit, but again, just enough to let you know if you're interested in going to the more detailed workshop or not. So we talked about small orders. So let's say we want to buy goods or services and we want to spend less than $100,000 total. We're allowed by law to not advertise, but we can actually solicit bids by more informal means like telephone, fax, written quotation. We can post the opportunity on our website, and we can award the contract based on that solicitation process. In contrast to, and I'll talk more about it later, large order or over $100,000, by law we have to put the notice out in the newspaper of a certain circulation, and there's a little more formality to the solicitation process. So small orders, we follow a more informal process. With small orders, City of Chicago certified MBE and WBE firms are solicited first, and then for bids that are over $10,000, we have MBE, WBE compliance required. And just with a show of hands for now, who is familiar with MBE, WBE, what that means? Okay, almost everybody. So what I'll do really quickly is talk a little bit about that. MBE stands for Minority Business Enterprise. WBE stands for Women-Owned Business Enterprise. Those are certifications that are created by the Chicago Municipal Code, and they are for historically disadvantaged groups as far as opportunities to do business with the city. And what the Municipal Code has done is it has set up certain goals for participation by certified MBE and WBE firms on city contracts. And the goals by Municipal Code are 25% MBE, 5% WBE. But what does that really mean? To sum it up briefly, let's say there's a $100,000 contract that we're putting out, and a non-MBE, non-WBE firm bids on that contract and wins. Well, if there are compliance requirements of MBE, WBE participation, and they are 25% MBE, 5% WBE, it means that when the vendor performs the work, the one that won the bid, the prime contractor, that they're going to bring on board at least 2 subcontractors. An MBE firm that's going to perform 25% of real work on the project, and a WBE that will perform at least 5% of real work on the project. And in return for that real work, the MBE will receive 25% of the proceeds of the total contract, or $25,000, and the WBE will receive 5% or $5,000 from the total proceeds of the project. So that's one way of participation and one way MBE, WBE compliance works. There are other certifications, by the way. Say, for example, there's federal dollars involved. Well, instead of calling it MBE or WBE or using MBE or WBE, we might use DBE. That's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. It's pretty much the same concept, but federal law creates the DBE designation, and since we're using their dollars, we follow their rules. There's also ACDBE, that's Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. That's if you're performing airport concession work at the airport. We also have programs for BEPD, that's Business Enterprises Owned by People with Disability. We also have programs for veteran-owned business enterprises. And so there are a number of certifications that if you have been historically disadvantaged may be of benefit to you in the future. Practical tip. If you believe you're certified, or I'm sorry, if you believe you're eligible to be certified, get the process started as far as applying for your certification as soon as possible. You don't have to have an opportunity in mind or a contract that you want to bid on or that you want to participate on to start the application process. And what you don't want to have happen is you waited, saw the opportunity you wanted, and then you don't have the benefit of your certification because you submit your application when you realize there's an opportunity, and then by the time it's processed, the opportunity has come and gone. because you have to be certified. Just because you're eligible doesn't mean you get the benefits of the program. You have to be certified as a business entity to actually benefit from the program. So get your certification application started if you haven't done so already, and if you believe you're eligible. The other thing is, you may be eligible for certification, but you don't have to become certified. You may believe, yeah, I'm eligible for these programs, but I just don't want to do the paperwork, or I'm doing fine bidding without any certification. And you can bid on any project. You'll just be bidding as though you're any other vendor that's not eligible. Just because you're eligible doesn't mean you can't bid, and it doesn't mean that you get the benefit until you're certified. So those are the basics of small orders. Now, what about competitive bids? Now, there's a little more formality to competitive bids. Remember, there were small orders under $100,000, regular orders or large orders are over $100,000. By law, we have to advertise. Right now, we advertise in the Sun-Times in the classified ad section. We also post opportunities on cityofchicago.org/procurement. We have hard copies available here in the bid and bond room. The solicitation period where we put these opportunities out there and advertise them is 10 to 30 calendar days. And then lastly, a deposit may be required for some bids. So a couple side notes about all that. First of all, the bid deposits. There's a separate workshop that I present on bid deposits and performance and payment bonds. So if you're in construction or certain work services and you're interested in performance and payment bond issues, I encourage you to look up the dates for that workshop. I'll talk about I'll talk about bonding generally at that workshop. Also, there is something that is somewhat distinct, sometimes confused, and that is a bid deposit might be due. But bid deposits are different than bid bonds. But bottom line is, if it's required, it'll be in the specifications that we hand out to the vendors that want to bid. So when you pick up a bid package from the bid and bond room on an opportunity you're interested in, it's full of documents. It includes specifications. Specifications are all the details about what we want, the way we want it. Within those specifications, you're going to see whether or not bonds are required with your bid, whether or not there's a bid deposit that's needed. And a bid deposit, by the way, is like an assurance to us that you're going to honor your bid. In other words, you're not going to bid, and then when we come to you 20 days later and say, here's your contract, you're not going to say to us, thanks, but no thanks. I've already entered into a contract in Milwaukee, and I'm not interested in doing business with the city anymore. We have to have some assurance that bids we're evaluating are going to be honored, and bid deposits are one way for that. Somewhat related, but distinct, are bid fees. Bid fees are, unlike bid deposits, are non-refundable. And bid fees are on very large, typically construction projects. So if you're not in construction, or if you do smaller construction projects, you're probably not going to see bid fees. Bid fees are on very large projects where our evaluation process takes a lot of time, a lot of human resources to make sure we put the contract out right. So we charge a bid fee. It sort of helps us with some of the costs of administrating bid evaluation. Now, when you see an advertisement, let's say in the paper, or you see an opportunity on the website, it's going to give you a taste of what the project's about, right? For example, you might look in the classified ad section of the Sun-Times, and there might be City of Chicago logo on an ad, and it says City of Chicago anticipates buying, again, let's use the example, police cars. If you're interested, bid package will be available, bid and bond room. Bids are due by a certain date, right? So you sell police cars. Let's say you've read that, you sell police cars, it sparked your interest. You come down to the bid and bond room, you pick up a bid package. You open up the bid package, and as I described, you're going to pull out all that paper. It's going to include specifications. Specifications are the details of what we want and the way we want it delivered, right? So you read through those specifications, and one of the things you see in the specifications is that a pre-bid opportunity is going to occur. What's a pre-bid? A pre-bid could be as simple as a meeting where you come down and you get to ask questions about the specifications, like questions about what the project is going to be about, what the expectations are. If answers are justified, we will then issue written answers in the form of a clarification to all vendors that took out a bid package. If the questions rise to the, hey, these specifications could have been better, they could have been clearer, or maybe they could have just been different, then we might issue an addendum which tells everybody that took out a bid package, hey, here are the changes. I encourage you to attend pre-bid conferences for that reason. I encourage you to, not only encourage you, I have to tell you, you must attend them if they are mandatory, and it'll say so, because if you fail to attend a mandatory pre-bid conference, on that basis alone, we may end up rejecting your bid. If it's optional, I still encourage you to attend. You're going to gain a lot of information. You're going to make sure you don't miss a beat as far as information getting out there, and it's a great networking opportunity. You get a chance to meet with other vendors that you may have business relationships with in the future, or that may be interested in using you as a subcontractor on some other projects in the future. So there are a number of reasons why it's good to attend a pre-bid conference. Question and answer session are taken care of. Keep in mind also, there might be a site inspection that falls within a pre-bid conference. Say you're going to do some major construction or maintenance or repair for the city. Sometimes it's necessary that you actually see the site, right, to know what you're getting into before you bid and commit to it. So site inspection might be part of a pre-bid conference. Okay. Now, if there's not a pre-bid meeting and you still have questions, you can contact the contract administrator that is named in the solicitation package, and you can send in your questions, and those questions will be answered by the contract administrator. It says complete bid documents. Why is that so critical? Well, when we award contracts, we have to award them, especially for competitive bids, we have to award them by law to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. I said that earlier, and I repeated it the same way because it's actually, I'm not just throwing out loosely terms or comments. That's actually the law, lowest responsive and responsible bidder. What does that mean? Well, we all, I think, can figure out the lowest bidder is the bidder that submits a bid and the prices are the lowest. That's great. But in addition to having the lowest prices, you actually have to be responsive and responsible. So what does that mean? Responsive means you're giving us what we want the way we want it. So if the specifications that I described earlier for the police cars, if you open them up and you pulled out the specifications and it said we need police cars that are white in color with blue stripes and sirens that have a certain decibel loudness and lights that spin around a certain amount of times per second, tires that are so high, 4-door, not 2-door. It means that you have to give us police cars that meet those requirements. You might, as a vendor, be able to get the best price in the world on green police cars that are 2-door models and don't meet the light and siren requirements, but you can get them cheaper. That doesn't do anyone any good. If you submit a bid suggesting that you're going to sell us those, you're not giving us what we want the way we want it, and based on that, we have to reject your bid as being non-responsive. But it goes deeper than that. Responsiveness also is about how you fill out the bid package. Remember I talked about addenda might be issued? Well, there's a line on addendum where you have to initial and return that addendum with your bid so we know you saw it and we know you're committed to those changes. You fail to initial the addendum, you're non-responsive. The bid has to be signed at the end by someone with signature authority for the corporation so that it's binding. Say you forget to sign the end. We can't let you come in a week later after the bid was due and say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll sign it now. That's a failure. You're not responsive. We have to reject your bid. My point being is this: read all the documents from front to back, word for word, thoroughly. Where requirements say you must do something, do it. If it say you may do something, probably should do it. But keep in mind, where you're required to do anything, do it, because it's a shame if when we receive your bid, let's say you're the lowest bidder, it's a shame for the city, not just for you. You put the time into preparing that bid. It's a shame for you that you don't get the project, but it's a shame for us because now we have to go to the next higher priced bidder, so we're paying more because of a typo or a technical error. That's a shame for us too. So submit your bids, cross your T's, dot your I's, make sure you're the lowest bidder, but then also make sure you're responsible. That was, remember, lowest responsive, responsible bidder. Responsibility is that you're presently capable of delivering what we want the way we want it. So let's say, for example, you see an opportunity to build a runway out at O'Hare Airport. It's a huge project, big dollars involved. Your company wants in on the project. But let's say that your company only has a couple trucks, let's say 2 pickup trucks, let's say a dozen employees, doesn't have any security clearance for working on airport property, has delivered concrete work on sidewalks for the Park District for years, but has never worked on a major runway project. Well, might be a fantastic vendor, might do great work, but is that vendor presently capable of delivering a runway at O'Hare Airport? Not unless we have, maybe 20 years to get that runway done. So no, we have to get someone who's presently capable of delivering that runway. Now, does that mean that a vendor like that can't participate on a large project? There's other ways to participate. That vendor could look to network and subcontract with a larger contract, larger prime contractor that wins the project. Benefit of that, you get to work on a portion of the project, you get to make money off the project, and you get to build capacity and learn about what it's like to work on airport property. What does it take to get airport security approval? So there's a number of benefits to firms trying to participate on projects like that in ways other than bidding as a prime. But if you're going to bid as a prime, you have to be the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And again, these are requirements. You want to make sure that when you submit your bid, that you include any bid deposits, as I mentioned, any bid fees, and almost the most important issue, make sure you're on time. The solicitation will say when the bid is due. It's on a certain day, at a certain time, at a certain location. If you are 5 minutes late, you are not on time. And it could be a basis for rejecting your bid. So make sure your bid is on time. Do not be late, because we don't want to, again, lose the lowest bid based on timeliness. Bid openings are Monday through Friday, except for major holidays, at 11 a.m. City Hall in this room, the bid and bond room. Bids are literally opened and read aloud, so you'll hear what it is that you bid and that other vendors bid. Bids are tabulated. That means they're summarized, and then they're put and made available on the internet, and they're made available on the DPS website within 24 hours. Now, you are sitting in the bid opening, you hear that you're the lowest bidder. You get excited because it sounds like you believe you're responsible, you believe you were responsive, you're the lowest bidder, you must have won the contract. Take a deep breath and wait for a moment, because you don't get the contract that day. There's a evaluation process and an award process, and that does take time. The time varies based on the complexity of the project and other factors. But we do our best to award as soon as possible. We have to find out whether the vendors are in fact responsive and responsible. The department that is interested in the contract, let's say police cars I keep talking about, let's say the police department, is interested in the contract for police cars, they have to make a recommendation of award, knowing who's bid. We have to make sure there's an acceptable bid package. Once we even have the contract, there are, by law, multiple signatures that are required, mayor, comptroller, chief procurement officer, so we have to cycle the contract documents through that cycle. We have to check the adequacy of insurance from the vendor, performance and payment bonds, but ultimately we will award the contract to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Now, I talked all about goods, talked all about the competitive bid process. Everything I said about goods and that whole competitive bid process applies to work services. Work services are those services that are a little more common in nature, less than professional services as far as the level of skill required. They are still extremely valuable. Examples can be landscaping, security guard services, services that are very important, critical to the city, but at a certain point, as long as you meet licensing requirements and as long as you meet certain basic training, education, and experience requirements, there's a number of vendors that can provide those services and compete based on pricing, as opposed to professional services, as I mentioned, which are at a little separate level of skill. To get those contracts in place, we use RFPs, or requests for proposals. Now, when we advertise, the process starts the same. So you're going to look in the newspaper or on the website to see RFP opportunities the same way you would look for competitive bid opportunities. So you look in the same place. You come down, you pick up the bid package the same way. When you read it, though, you're going to open those bid packages, and instead of asking for your lowest bid, it's going to ask you to propose why you're the best vendor for the project at the best price. So you're not going to submit a bid, just lowest price, you're going to submit a proposal. And it's going to be a persuasive written document telling us why you're the best vendor at the best value. We will form evaluation committees here at the city, made up of members of departments, city personnel, and you may be brought in by that committee to answer questions. You may have to give a presentation. You may even get an opportunity to propose better ways the project can be performed based on your expertise. At the end of the day, you will be scored, your written proposal will be scored, and based on that score, an agreement, which is another just word for contract, is awarded to the vendor that is scored out at the highest. That applies to professional services, including architecture and engineering. So anyone who's worked in construction, architecture and engineering, sometimes they get so intermixed that folks think architecture and engineering gets treated similarly to construction by way of competitive bid. It's not the case. It's done by way of RFP or RFQ. Now, say we're going to award work to a pool of vendors, and you might ask, why is it that I would ever want to award to a pool of vendors or have a pool of vendors? Well, sometimes we know that there's going to be work done over a period of time, but we don't know exactly the details of the work, and we don't know exactly when we're going to order it. It could be that we don't know when the funding is going to become available. We don't know necessarily what comes up, what we learn as projects progress. A good example is projects having to do with Chicago Department of Transportation. Let's take road work. One of the longest streets I know of is Milwaukee Avenue. It starts in the heart of the city and it goes, I think, all the way almost to the state line, up by Wisconsin. What do you know about Milwaukee Avenue is that it gets work done, and then by the time you complete the work, probably got to start at the beginning and start all over again. A number of factors play a role in whether or not we're going to start or continue work on any road. There might be federal transportation funds that we're getting or going to get. When you're doing the work in construction, including road construction, there are unforeseen conditions in the ground that may change the nature of a program. So as we plug along, work comes due, we have pools of vendors that are ready to jump on that work when it comes around, but we can't just wait to get those contracts in place because sometimes work is needed right now. And so we want to have a pool at the ready. When the work comes due, we go out to the pool of vendors and we say, look, here's this work that is now available. We're going to talk to all of you and negotiate and compete and see who's going to get that work. When we award that specific work, we award a task order. A task order is like a mini contract within the larger master consulting agreement that you get when you join the pool. So there's a big umbrella contract that you win as a result of an RFQ. That's a master consulting agreement. It's broader, and it generally tells you what is expected of you generally. But then within the limits of that master consulting agreement, you'll get a task order for each project that'll tell you specifically what the project task is. When you complete that task under that task order, you go back in the pool and wait for your next task order. Are you guaranteed work at any given time? No. When you're in the pool, you wait, and when work comes due, you hopefully get that work. Now, the method of getting a master consulting agreement in place for a pool is virtually identical to an RFP. Starts with the same type of advertisement. You come on down, you pick up your materials. But when you open your bid package and you read the materials, instead of submitting a proposal or reading that we want a proposal, you're going to submit qualifications. Don't worry, it's not that complicated. It is basically like a resume for your company. Now, if it's a very complex project or very complex work, I mean, it could be binders and binders of resume. But it's basically telling us who you are, why you're qualified to be in the pool to do the scope of work of the master consulting agreement, why you should be in the pool, who your key personnel might be if there's more than a few people, what are their backgrounds, have you worked on similar projects, maybe for other municipalities of a similar size. So it's basically, you're submitting your resume gets scored, you might get called in and get scored after a presentation or in-person meeting. Once you're scored, if you're qualified, get a qualifying score, you're put into the pool. You're in the pool, you get that master consulting agreement, and then you sit back, you wait for task orders. Task orders allow you to do the specific projects through the life of the master consulting agreement. I'm not going to get in a great deal. A show of hands though, who here is interested in construction? Okay, so I encourage you folks to attend the JOC workshop. It's taught by our deputy over our construction unit and gives great detail about the job order contracting process. It's basically, as I described, for small to medium-sized construction projects. What was determined at one point was that those size construction projects could typically be broken down into common tasks. Those tasks were assigned general pricing and then put into a pricing book, and competitors basically bid a discount off the price of those tasks. It's still competitive. It's similar to competitive bidding, but it is slightly different. So if you're into construction and you're interested in those types of projects, please, I encourage you to attend that separate workshop, and the schedule is right outside and available online. A little more about job order contracting. Okay. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about certification. I gave you a summary earlier. And there's a number of separate workshops about certification. So I encourage you to look at the workshop schedule and get greater detail and depth by going to those workshops. They are taught by our certification unit, and also we have a section taught by our compliance unit. We're not only interested in certifying and giving those opportunities a fair chance, but we're also all about compliance. So if you have a contract and there are compliance requirements, we have a unit that monitors and makes sure that vendors are actually meeting the compliance that they've committed to. What you'll learn at much greater depth, but at a high level, is that those certified firms I talked about typically have to be 51% or more owned and controlled by the person or people that are eligible, that are the basis for the certification. Under the BEPD program, businesses also must be 51% or more owned by individuals with individuals with a disability. I mentioned contract monitoring and compliance. We not only look into compliance by MBEs, WBEs, DBEs, ACDBEs, we also look at compliance with resident participation. We look at equal employment opportunity. We look at making sure minimum and base wage requirements are being met by vendors. So we do monitor extensively what it is that contractors are doing. We even have a system that prime contractors report into what and when they are paying their subcontractors, and we are able to track exactly what's going on with not only participation but with actual payments. So we are very serious about contracting compliance. We are also very serious about fraud, and it's, I think, worth me taking a moment to inform you as vendors. By law, you have a requirement to report corruption and fraud that you may find in the procurement process. We do the same. As a member of legal for the City of Chicago, we work with the Office of the Inspector General on investigations of vendors, investigations of subcontractors. We are involved and head up the debarment process. Debarment is where we can actually take away a vendor or an individual's right to do business with the city. And so we take not only contract performance compliance seriously, but we also take fraud investigation and policing very seriously. And you have a responsibility, not only an interest, but you have a responsibility to police that as well. Now, getting back to compliance, there are a number of ways that compliance can be achieved as far as participation. Participation can be by a prime contractor directly winning a contract as an MBE, WBE, or DBE. Joint venturing with MBE or between MBE, WBE, and DBEs. I've talked extensively about subcontracting with MBEs and WBEs and DBEs. And then you can also purchase materials from certified firms. So the supplies and materials that are used on a contract can be a basis for meeting your participation requirements. As far as reporting requirements are concerned, prime contractors are responsible for submitting monthly subcontractor payment certification forms, weekly certified payrolls, and waivers of liens. And this goes back to us staying on top of making sure that everyone is fulfilling their obligations as a vendor. I teach an additional workshop on incentives and programs. I encourage you to attend that. But to give you a taste of what you might learn about, there are programs for small business initiatives and construction. There is credit that can be gained towards compliance through diversity credit program, mentor protege program. So these are a number of programs where compliance can be addressed, and you can learn about compliance, and you can also learn about ways that you can get a competitive advantage in the contracting process. There are also bid incentives. What are bid incentives? Bid incentives are ways that a vendor can get a competitive edge during a competitive procurement process. So let's say, for example, you are within a category that qualifies for a certain bid incentive. And let's say that that bid incentive is 5%. So I qualify for that bid incentive. Let's say my company does. I bid on a contract, and I bid $100,000 on that project. The vendor next to me does not qualify for that bid incentive, and they bid $100,000. So we both bid the same amount of money, $100,000. Well, how do you evaluate it? Through the 5% bid incentive, my bid is, for evaluation purposes only, considered 5% less. So my bid is considered $95,000 instead of $100,000 because I get a 5% bid preference. The other vendor, without the bid preference, their bid's still $100,000. So I'm the lowest bidder, I win the contract. When I perform the contract, the bid incentive does not act as a penalty towards me in any way. I actually bill out at $100,000 the way I bid. So that's the way a bid incentive works. And there are bid incentives for small business enterprise, veteran-owned business enterprises owned by people with disabilities. If you're a city-based manufacturer, you get a bid incentive. City-based business, if you have apprentice utilization, and if you utilize alternatively powered vehicles within your vehicle fleet of your company. Now, there are requirements for all these bid incentives, and that's where the detail comes in. So I, again, encourage you to go to my workshop on programs and incentives, and I get into more detail about the elements or what are the requirements for getting these bid incentives. But at least it gives you an idea. For example, if you're a city-based manufacturer, you probably would have an interest in showing up at that workshop. If you are none of these, it may not be helpful to you. Excuse me. Now, as we're closing out, I want to encourage you to go again to Department of Procurement Services website. That's www.cityofchicago.org/procurement. It is full of information. You can see awarded contracts and modifications. You can see what vendors are actually being paid, when they've received payments. You can see bid tabulations of recent bids. You can see weekly bid opportunities. You can search the database for MBE, WBE firms. If you're a prime and you're going to bid and you need to find an MBE or WBE firm in order to bid, we have a searchable database. We also talk about bid incentives on the website. And then you can go there, look at all the rules, regulations, policies, and procedures, and start getting familiar with them. Again, it's all at cityofchicago.org/procurement. And these are a few screenshots of what the database looks like. Remember I said you could look for contracts, look for payments. So if you go to our procurement webpage, cityofchicago.org/procurement, go to the top, middle of the page, there's an icon, awarded contracts is the label. Click on that. It'll take you to this search engine. Actually, there's one page in between where it allows you to either go to another agency or to ours. It's already by default set for us, so just click next, and then it takes you to this database. As you can see, you can look for vendor information, contracts and awards, disclosures, opportunities that are out there, payments, and a number of other items. You can search by vendor name, contract number, department name, and the list goes on. Now, by the way, that's actually a good tip. If you're going to do business with the City of Chicago, it's not a bad idea to start speaking our language a little bit. We get in our world, and we sometimes forget that the way we think about projects might not be second nature to everybody. When we talk about projects, most often we talk in terms of PO numbers and spec numbers. So when you pick up a bid package, start getting familiar knowing the specification number or spec number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the purchase order number or PO number, which typically is not awarded until contract award. After you've been awarded the contract, it's very easy to use that as your reference. And when I say it's important to know or helpful, it's easier when you're calling the city, for example, 6 months into your contract and you have a question. The first thing typically is going to be asked is, what's the PO number? Or what's the spec number? That's typically asked even before what's the project name, because project names start sounding alike, right? But PO spec number, there's only one of those assigned to any given project. So if you have those numbers, you're going to get right to the person, right to the project that's handling it. If you call and say, oh, I'm calling about that landscape project, well, we've got, how many contracts that have landscape in the name, and it'll take you too long to get to where you're going. So learn those numbers. It'll be very helpful to you. And as you can see, we use those numbers all the time. You can use it for searches on our online database. Another page about disclosures that you can find online that vendors submit. And this is the page that'll show you can search for payments to vendors. You can search for bid tabulations to see what came in on a certain project as far as bids. And that's the information you can learn through our search engine. Now, the last point I want to make, we're very active on social media. You can learn a great deal by staying in touch with us online. So check out Facebook, check out Twitter. We have a page on Facebook. We have a presence on Twitter, and you can learn a lot about what's going on. can also go on YouTube, just like this workshop. They're all filmed. If you're not able to come down and see us in person, you can always watch us online from home or from the office. You can watch us on YouTube. You can even go back. If you came to this presentation and you forgot something I said or something I said wasn't perfectly clear, you can always go back and watch the presentation again when you get back to the home or office or back home. So I want to thank you. I'm going to take questions now for a bit. With that, though, let me do this. Let me give you my contact information, and that way, if you have something very specific that you'd rather ask after the session, you can always reach out to me by email or phone. And to do that, you can contact me at, you can get a hold of me at my office. My office number is 312-744-0851. And my email, which is probably the best way to get a hold of me, is my name. So it's TERRENCE.GLAVIN@cityofchicago.org. So please feel free to reach out to me in the future. If I'm not the best resource to answer your question, I'll do my best to find a resource for you that'll be better for you or serve your purpose better. So feel free to reach out to us in the future. And with that, are there any questions? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Well, as far as the formation of the, and the question is, you're interested in a project, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're interested in a project, you've worked on IDOT projects before, you've worked on tollway projects before, it's inspection and construction related, and you're interested in a City of Chicago project, but you want to submit as a joint venture with another firm, and you're curious what the forms are that you need to submit a bid. So the first question is, if you're first of all, you can bid, as I mentioned earlier, as a joint venture. A joint venture is two business entities typically, maybe more, coming together, joining their resources for a variety of reasons to perform one specific job or purpose or for one specific endeavor. It can be ongoing, but usually it's defined, what you're getting together to accomplish. And then as a joint venture, you can bid on projects. Now, as far as, have you already formed your joint venture? Okay. Okay. So the first step is the formation of the joint venture. I cannot advise you on how to form the joint venture, but the joint venture agreement should be in writing. As far as the details of that, I encourage you to get private counsel that can advise you on your relationship with the other member of the joint venture and draft a joint venture agreement that reflects the understanding well and lays out your rights and responsibilities and your joint venture partner right and responsibilities well. But having said that, once you have a joint venture agreement, if a joint venture is allowed, which is not uncommon, then you bid the same way you would bid on a normal project, but you do typically have to include your joint venture agreement so that we know. Well, what I'm going to do is this. As a general response, just for informational purposes for everybody, always read the specifications, as I said, down to the detail. As far as what forms are needed and what forms, if there's an official form that needs to be used, the specifications will typically tell you exactly what you're supposed to include and whether or not you must include it. Now, having said that, specific to your project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you by email to the head of our construction unit and get the conversation going about the forms. Because what I don't want to do is this. I don't know what project you're interested in. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to tell you to use a certain form just off the cuff as I stand here and have it be a basis for why you're not responsive. Because I don't know what project you're interested in. If I steer you wrong, that could be bad for you. So I don't want to tell you what form to use. What I want to do is connect you with the deputy of our construction unit. And if anyone has a similar question, they can reach out to me and I will connect them to the construction unit. Or if you have a question about forms otherwise, I can get you connected with the right deputy about the forms that should be used for specific projects. I'll be glad to do that. Okay? You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Well, looks like we're all set. Everyone, I really appreciate all your time, taking it out of your schedule. I hope it was informative for you. I look forward to hearing from you in the future and seeing you at future workshops. Have a great day. Yes, I can give, anyone who's interested, I can give you a business card. Yes. Mm-hmm.